Hey everybody, it's Merkel, and today in this one we'll be talking about the good old classic servers, as they were discussed quite a bit today, or rather yesterday now, I suppose, at BlizzCon. But BlizzCon has officially closed their doors, and I just want to go over some of the stuff they said, and share my thoughts and stuff. So let's get into it. Now, I have to say, after watching the panels on the second day of BlizzCon, I was truly and pleasantly surprised. Absolutely. My optimism had increased massively for the authenticity of classic servers, how they're going to be. After playing the demo for the first couple days, I played it and I was really concerned because I could tell right away so many things seemed off. It just wasn't a classic experience at first. I was telling my energy was regenerating funny. I could definitely tell that right away, and I thought that was strange. And I didn't get upset, because I thought to myself, this is a demo. This was probably put together pretty quickly because they just wanted to have something for the showroom floor. They wanted to show it off, tell people, hey, we got this. We're showing it. This is what we got so far. So before I judged, I really wanted to see all of the panels to see what's going to be discussed. Now, when the panel came up, it was about how Classic came to be, their methodology for creating Classic, the experience as it is, the biggest issues that arose, because Classic is, of course, a game that is 14 years old now. And it meant all of their systems, all of the intertwining parts that make it able to run on a Blizzard server had been overwritten, replaced. They just simply didn't exist anymore. And this meant that even if they had all the information from a previous version that worked perfectly, it really meant very little to them, because there's no way that it worked with the current Blizzard software. That stuff didn't exist. Even if they had the code for it, it didn't really make any difference to them. So instead of recreating a completely new set of information, they took the code from a version of Legion and overwrote that as the code to be used for Classic. This would effectively mean that all the bug fixes they had, those would be in place, all the issues the game had, and really any of the previous problems that arose from Classic would all effectively be gone. The biggest problem, though, is this also meant that even though it had all the Classic textures and all the Classic landscape, things like that, it really wasn't Classic. It was just a Legion version of Classic. So they set forth and decided that rather than building from the ground upwards, they would deconstruct the building, right? They'd bring it down to the Classic version and present it in a way that seemed like they were going to be as authentic as possible, from what I could tell. It was stated that they would never promise to be absolutely pixel perfect, because they just don't want to say something that they can't deliver on, and they are trying their best to make this as authentic as they possibly can. And I gotta say, I was happy, because after watching those slides and seeing the people in charge of the product, it truly seemed to me like they were hard at work trying to make this as accurate as possible. It also seemed like a lot of work was gone into making the current systems work on an older version of the game that was never intended to run them, because these systems exist for the game now. Keeping all that technical stuff aside, though, because not very smart about the coding stuff, I don't know a whole lot about it. The presentation went on further to surprise me. It was really good. It was discussed how they see designing the game, what's fitting for recreating an experience for it, just all kinds of stuff like that, because there's really so many things that could be discussed about Classic, since today we know what was a bug, what was really bad game design, and what was meant to happen but got quality of life updates later. And one of the examples Ian covered was the fact that bosses had a debuff limit. So back in the day, if you had 10 people trying to put dots onto a monster, and each of them had 3 dots, for example, then just over half of those could actually get applied to the boss. And that's because the debuff limit was in the game. So the boss could only have 8 debuffs originally. This was later buffed to 16 debuffs, and now basically they uncapped it. You can put as many debuffs as you want on a monster, and it doesn't really matter. Now, Ian said this was never intended by the team. There was obviously the debuff limit, but this was never their intention when they were creating it. It was just simply something that technology at the time didn't allow for them. Even if they wanted to change it, it just wasn't there. They couldn't do it. However, if you change something like this, and even though they have the technology now to do it, then it really wouldn't allow for an authentic classic experience. So they choose not to update it, which is actually, like, in my opinion, an extremely good thing, because if they were to remove a limit like that, then boss progression would be far different than it ever was before you completely change the game. By changing one simple thing like that, it just, everything gets altered absolutely drastically. So I was really glad after listening to this, because I like that approach when you're looking at subjects. If they're saying, hey, is this absolutely how we should do it? Because even if we can do this, it doesn't make the game better. It makes it way different than Classic. And the same goes for many other features. They simply don't want to add it because if it's going to remove the authenticity, then it's not a Classic experience. And that reassured me a whole lot that they were trying their best to build a very proper product. Now, on the flip side, they also plan on keeping some things even if it's not entirely vanilla. And in a way, I would consider myself mostly purist. But at the end of the day, as long as the core fundamentals of the game are there, and the game is still as it is, I'm fine with excusing minor stuff. It's not going to bother me. In their cases, there are a couple UI features that are simply seen as harmless. It helps you, collect your mail faster. It helps you trade stuff quicker, and just equipping things. It's very simple UI updates, and they plan on keeping that. Again, mostly harmless. Really can't do anything to change the game by just adding simple things like that. And I see that as very little issue. But then there are other more pressing things that they want to add, like a 2-hour loot window, which that was added in Wrath of the Lich King, if you remember. This is the thing which allowed you to trade any item you got to someone in your party within the 2-hour time limit. And is a very handy feature, as we know. It's being used all the time. I mean, it happens regularly. That 2-hour loot window, you do it all the time. You're trading with people. And Ian also provided sound reasoning for why they wanted to do this. He said that back in the day, many tickets were written to have gear transferred because somebody accidentally pressed the wrong thing, gave it to the wrong person in Master Looter, and bada bing, bada boom, you had to wait a couple days just to get your gear. And by adding this feature, it would allow them to reduce the time. They don't have to worry about answering those tickets, because if you accidentally click need and you get the item, you just trade it to your buddy, you're done. And it would allow them to answer more pressing issues from player issues in tickets. Obviously, very good reasoning for all this. The logic behind it is right there. Yet, I would rather simply not see it getting added. And the reason for me not wanting it being added is because if you change that, that's like a massive change to how Classic was. Trading gear was just something we didn't think would be possible for a very long time. It just didn't exist. And at the same time, I have strong belief that it would get abused if it's not implemented properly. Because if you remember when LFR was first implemented, way back in Cataclysm, and remember how annoying it was when everyone and their mother was running together, rolling need, and then they just handed the gear off to their friend who needed it, actually. They didn't need it, but they could roll need on it, so they gave it to their buddy. And it wasn't really a fun experience for anyone. Go back to Classic, and having this added, right? The same thing can occur, and it's even to a worse degree in Classic, because there were no roll restrictions back then. So everyone could roll need on absolutely every piece of gear. You jump into a dungeon, and then 4 out of 5 people roll need on the piece of cloth that you're after, but 3 of those people are plate users, and only one of them is actually a cloth user. Turns out all of his buddies were just rolling need to hand it off to their friend. Not a very fun experience, because you're basically getting bullied out of loot, and it's just not very good. And the same could be said with Master. You can do that exactly the same thing with Master Looter. Sure, that's absolutely true. You can bully people out of loot by just taking it with Master Looter. But if they were to add this feature to Classic, allowing people to trade loot, I think it would have to be under extremely strict circumstances, covering things like loot should only be traded between players for 2 hours, but it's only with guildmates, and it's only on Master Looter setting while in raids of 20 or higher difficulty. You know, very, very specific circumstances for this setting, and it just, that way they can get the issue solved that they're trying to, because just having this in lower difficulty dungeons and small scaled raids and things like that, it seems like it doesn't have a place there. I get why they want to add it, and I get what their reasoning behind it, but keep it to like very high difficulty raids, so that way it's just not changing the core gameplay. Nothing's getting altered massively. That way they fix their major issue, and they don't have a non-authentic vanilla. If you get my drift, that's what I'm trying to express here. And is that really, really, you know, a necessity of anything? I know why they're adding it, but what I'm trying to say is if they really want to add something, they have to do it in very limiting ways, because I want to grasp that authentic experience when I play the game. Know what I mean? Then finally, the last big thing, really, everyone's talking about this, and it's riled everyone up, and I completely understand why, is they want to add sharding into Classic. And Ian says as much as they don't want to add this, because he is well aware it definitely removes the Classic feel to a degree, he thinks they would like to use it primarily for the release weeks, keep the Classic servers going live, you know, keep them nice and fresh. This would help with massive player congestion, flooding in, no issues, servers would be stable with large amounts of players, and it would make a more cohesive and clean beginner experience for everyone involved. So what are my thoughts on that, though? I don't want it. I think if there's anything that really captures the beginning experience of Classic, and that is going out, seeing the masses of people you'll encounter immediately as it starts, then after all that, you'll have to fight for ages just to get a few kills to finish your quest. It will be toxic, it'll be hectic, and absolutely crazy. And I think that right there is what would make it perfect. I'd be fine with that. That joy of seeing an overcrowded world is just what really captures Classic for me. Just seeing too many people in one spot. It's perfect. I love it, and that's what I want. I'm perfectly fine with sitting in a queue for an hour just to log in, if necessary, as long as they keep sharding out of the game. I think it would just ruin a major part of the feeling that makes Classic Classic. And I want that authenticity when I play this game. Anyways, though, I have to say, though, after watching the panels, a lot of my doubts have truly been lifted. Like, I even have mad respect for Ian now, because after watching this, sometimes it just feels like he's pushing stuff that even he doesn't really want to put in the game. But watching and listening to the way he spoke about Classic, it really came across to me that he, as well as the devs creating it, are really, really passionate about making this experience what the fans want. I'm also super glad they decided to spread out the release of content in waves rather than all at once. It's gonna be so good reliving it all over again. I know it's a while away, but I'm really quaking in anticipation, and I truly have faith that they're going to do the best of their Blizzard quality abilities, and that's at least how I feel. I feel like I'm usually a doomsayer, I would say, but I really am feeling this. I can't wait for those servers to come live. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you again real soon. Bye-bye.